Hi guys, welcome back. It is video 2 and I forgot to actually go through domain vocabulary. So that's where we're going to start for video 2. Keep in mind the completed PowerPoint is on Canvas, so you can always go back to that and look at all of these definitions in more detail. So autotrophs, primary producers, photosynthesis, chemosynthesis, heterotroph, consumer, and detritus. So autotrophs are living things that can capture energy from non-living sources and that'll convert that energy into living cells. So autotrophs are animals like plants, some bacteria, and algae. Primary producers. This is the first producer of the energy-rich compounds that can be used later by other organisms. So the primary producer is going to be the plant that creates the primary source of the energy-rich compounds. Photosynthesis is the process used by plants and other autotrophs to capture the light energy and use to power the chemical reactions that convert carbon dioxide and water into carbohydrates and oxygen. So we know our photosynthetic equation. And so photosynthesis is just capturing that light, using that light energy to power through photosynthesis. And these are our plants, algae, and a lot of bacteria that are also photosynthetic. Chemosynthesis is basically almost the same as photosynthesis, just taking energy, capturing energy from chemical reactions and chemical energy as opposed to light energy. And it's going to then produce the carbohydrates necessary. Heterotrophs are organisms that obtain food by consuming other living things. So these are also called consumers. Consumers are organisms that rely on other organisms for their energy and food supply. We are consumers. We rely on plants, we rely on animals. And then detritus is the material that um, that is made up of decaying bits of plants and animal material. So if you've ever noticed in your fish tank, if you have a saltwater fish tank or you have a freshwater fish tank, you'll notice that a lot of the plants, if you have live plants or decomposing animals in there, if you had a fish die or whatnot, you'll see detritus at the bottom of the fish tank will build up because these are the tiny little bits of plants and animals. I wish we were in our classroom. I would show you in our fish tank. But these are the tiny bits of animals and plants that start to decay or shed, and then that living matter that once was living is now going to decay and create this material called detritus. All right, so primary producers. Primary producers are living things that will harness energy from the sun or from chemicals. So primary producers are autotrophs, and they can capture energy and convert it. So no living thing can create energy. There's nothing that can create or destroy energy. We know this because we know our um, energy conservation laws. And so nothing can create or destroy energy. Therefore, we can harness or capture energy. We cannot, plants can, and then convert it into usable energy like carbohydrates for us and other animals. So autotrophs also store this energy and make it available for other organisms. They store it in their roots, they store it in their leaves, they store it in their fruit and their seeds. Um, they are going to store these carbohydrates in a place where we can then harness that carbohydrate as our food, and other animals can do this as well. Hence, they are primary producers because they are producing the carbohydrates that are necessary for the rest of these animals. There are two types of way of capturing this energy. We can capture the energy, or plants can capture this energy by photosynthesis, and some bacteria can capture this energy by chemosynthesis. All life on Earth depends on primary producers, and furthermore, we depend on the sun. Um, Even though there is a lot of a lot of organisms that can do chemosynthesis as opposed to photosynthesis, we as human beings rely on primary producers and furthermore the sun. All right, energy from the sun. So plant algae and certain bacteria will harness the energy from the sun. They're able to process the energy by converting that sunlight and carbon dioxide into a sugar or a starch, and then put oxygen back into the atmosphere as a byproduct. We learned this when we talked about photosynthesis. We learned, the light and the dark cycle, and how NADPH brings in those electrons and whatnot. We had a whole story about this, so go back and review that, or come to Zoom and we'll talk about it. All right, plants are the main source of energy for consumers and terrestrial or ecosystems. Algae and plants are for aquatic ecosystems, and then algae do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to creating oxygen and feeding their ecosystems in marine ecosystems. And then bacteria that are photosynthetic are very important in ecosystems like tidal flats, salt marshes, and mangroves. So think about this. Why would bacteria be so important in these estuaries? What do bacteria accomplish? And what do they feed on? And how are they helping these little ecosystems survive? If you don't know, look it up. It's a really interesting situation. All right, life without light. Underwater volcanic vents will spew water that is filled with hydrogen sulfide. So a lot of areas that have sulfur are going to have bacteria that will use this sulfur and the chemical reactions that this sulfur induces in order to create their starches and sugars. So bacteria that live near these vents, there are bacteria all over the world that live in different volcanoes and places where they're inhabitable, or we once thought were inhabitable, seems to not be the case. And so these bacteria are able to feed animals that live in these areas and harness the energy from these areas, hydrogen sulfide, in order to create these sugars that are necessary for those little ecosystems. All right, so these bacteria will live inside the tissue of some worms and clams, and then they can mutually pass down their carbohydrates to their host and feed their host the carbohydrates that they have created with their or during chemosynthesis. So at the bottom, we have an equation, and that first one is the equation for photosynthesis. Although chemosynthesis is a lot like photosynthesis, it is not the same. And so you see that the equations are different from each other. So we have solar energy and photosynthesis. We have carbon dioxide with water will then give us the carbohydrate or the sugar with the oxygen as a byproduct. And then in hydrothermal energy or chemosynthesis, we have carbon dioxide, water, hydrogen sulfide, and oxygen will then give us the sugar or a type of carbohydrate with a sulfuric acid. All right, consumers. So there are several different types of consumers, but animal, fungi, and many bacteria can harness energy from the sun, or cannot harness energy from the sun, I'm sorry. So these organisms will depend on heterotrophs for their food, or other animals for their food. Heterotrophs or autotrophs for their food. So these organisms that are considered heterotrophs will have to acquire their energy from another source, which is usually by eating them. So heterotrophs are going to equal consumers, and the different types of consumers are carnivores, scavengers, decomposers, herbivores, omnivores, and detritivores. And carnivores will kill and eat other animals. So a lion is a carnivore, a tiger is a carnivore. Scavengers will consume carcasses of an already dead animal. So vultures are scavengers, raccoons are scavengers. They don't necessarily kill their prey, they will eat on whatever's left over from another animal that has killed it. Decomposers will chemically break down organic matter. This process will produce detritus. Um, the decomposers are the fungus. So fungi, we learned this when we talked about classification. Herbivores will eat plants, seeds, roots, fruits, and leaves. So herbivores, in this example, we have the elephant. Cows are herbivores. Certain birds will eat fruit, seeds, and sometimes leaves and stuff like that, but not very often. And then omnivores are organisms that will eat both plants and animals. An omnivore in this case is a bear. And then a detritivores is, in this case, the example is the worm. So the worm will chew and grind the detritus particles, and they will eat some of the decomposers as well. So with that being said, a lot of animals, so I was reading through your chapter, and I encourage you to read through your chapter, but what I found out was that a lot of animals that are herbivores tend to eat plants that have seeds or fruit, and they will prefer to eat the fruit and the seeds because they actually have more carbohydrates and more energy filled nutrient and easily to digest um, foods rather than eating the leaves that don't have as much carbohydrate and whatnot. So you'll see that leaves are plentiful, but when you have fruits available, these animals will tend to eat the fruit and seeds more than often. A lot of animals cannot be placed in these groups specifically because sometimes there can be a bird, for instance, that is an herbivore, will eat seeds or fruit, but then you have insects in that fruit or frogs or whatnot in that fruit, and they eat that as well. And so at this point, they would not be considered a carnivore. They're still considered an herbivore, but they don't neatly fit into, or an omnivore, they don't neatly fit into these categories all the time. Sometimes these animals will adapt to their certain situations, and so they will choose to eat different things depending on what is available. Um, what else do we have? So many grazers, like our cows, will graze for hours on end and do this very often, daily, because grass and leaves don't necessarily have much nutrient rich source. They're very poor in nutrients, and so they spend most of their days grazing, most of their time grazing, trying to use these this energy from, or retrieve the energy from the grass. And so also a lot of these animals that do eat the leaves and whatnot will have bacteria in their guts in order to process cellulose. No living organism can process cellulose. So we need to have certain bacteria in our intestines and guts and whatnot to process cellulose. And so it becomes very difficult for animals to process grass and leaves because that is their main component of sugars and starches. All right, so go ahead and read that last little part in your textbook. It was actually really interesting and cool to read about the cows. And oh, another fun fact, the cows are actually really large because we know that they have so many stomachs, but the reason why they have all of these stomachs and then will regurgitate their food and process it once again is because they need very large um, digestive systems, and that's why the herbivores are very large animals as well. They have very large digestive systems in order to carry all the bacteria and be able to process the grass and the leaves and whatnot that they need to process. So cool, fun fact. And with that being said, that is the end of our lesson. I hope you guys have a great week. I miss you immensely, and I can't wait to see you for week 6. So, any questions, you want to talk about anything, you learned something new and you want to share with me, please come visit me on my office hours and share with the rest of the students. I'd love to hear about um, your research and your new information. Always fun learning new things. All right, guys, love you. See you later. Hopefully you come by.